Autumn sun creeps through a window just as Hal Johnson slumps into the back of his couch. In his hand, a half-empty can of IPA. In his lap, a flimsy paper plate of food. Slovenly, balding, not much going for him. Things weren't always like this, but now, this is 40. Out of a career, dead broke, divorced, without a house, a wife, and kids he hasn't seen in ages. He looks down at his lap, at this slaw of fat and grease that is the burger before him, and he thinks. You see, not 3 years ago, Hal's life was quite the opposite. He was one of a few key geneticists at a cancer research firm, and one that paid quite handsomely. The culmination of his research was a work that, ironically, would become his white elephant. A 100-page-long expose on a possible miracle cure, a treatment for the disease itself, but one in which Hal had falsified evidence and was caught soon afterwards for. Upon his exposure, he owned up to his actions, but the damage was already done. He was excommunicated, ejected from the scientific community, his name besmirched forever. Along with his position and firing came his title, his pay, and any sort of credibility to his name. His home life fell apart, his legal dues took their toll, and now, a couple years later, here he rests in a small, humble shack in the South California suburbs. The shame itself was more than enough to bear and keep him up at night, but one very little thing got under his skin more than anything else. The last words of his publishing partner, his co-researcher Connor, right as they were about to send the paper out for peer review. You see, Hal got cold feet at the last second and protested that they'd be caught, that their errors would quickly be made public to anyone with a hint of a scientific eye. Connor, however, turned to him, smiled, and simply said, "Hal, don't sweat the small stuff. It'll be all right." Those words stung and stuck with him, even more so that it was only his career and his career alone that was ruined because of the error of judgment. But that was that, and this was now, and this is the present. Hal grabs the grease pile between two buns in front of him and raises it to his lips when an explosion is heard outside, a roaring in the sky. Hal leaps to his feet and sees dozens of neighbors doing the same. Upon walking outside and looking up into the blue California sky, he sees it. A giant, mile-long pearlescent disc hovering above the distant city skyline. On its back, what looked like thousands of shifting skyscrapers. In the coming weeks, the mothership would float over towards the Pacific Ocean, conveniently away from any major population centers. Governments and talking heads would discuss what to do, what it was. China, the US, Japan, Australia, Russia, England, all in a huff to decide what to do with the mysterious ship. Some would decide to take a preemptive strike, assuming malice. F-22s, drones, Hellfire missiles would be scrambled. The vessel was shot at, but to no avail. Discussions of nukes were brought up at one point, but quickly dismissed. It wasn't until one day when one of the skyscrapers detached itself from the back of the main ship and made its way back over LA County and descended to the ground that we saw it for the first time ever. Emerging from the portside door of the smaller vessel, beyond the maze and haze of police tape and news camera crews, came a being very clearly sapien, but not so much homo. Its head was tall, tubular, elongated, with two large black eyes. Its limbs flimsy and long, almost squid-like, but very much so limbs, arms. Beneath it, two, then another two legs on either side. It walks out and contorts its face into something we can only recognize as a smile. and then it opened its mouth.
Hello, humans. I've learned your language, and now I wish to speak. I have not come in conquest or war. I know what you're thinking, and it is quite the opposite. I am here to spread the message of love and peace for all beings, small and large, to your humble planet, if you'd allow me.
Beyond the tape, a man breaks through and walks up to the creature to police dismay. He approaches it and extends out his hand. The being does the same, shaking it in a familiar way.
Thank you, my good sir. Would you love to learn about the message of absolute peace?
Coming at you live, QSTW 499. You want it, we talk it.
So what, you're saying they really just don't eat anything? Nothing at all?
Well, they just persist off the ebbs and flows of the universe. So they say.
Well, that
Hey, watch your blood pressure,
doesn't
Mark.
make any sense. Everything eats something.
Well, according to them, they just eat air.
That's bullshit.
The being and the hundreds of others that came along with it, we would come to know as the Gradians. They acknowledge themselves as beings from a planet, well, it's not even worth pronouncing with our human tongues. Sardined into that ship along with thousands of others that lay unseen, they explained that they go from planet to planet, spreading a message of what they described as absolute sustainability. The Gradians come to worlds, and in exchange for given technology beyond the wildest bounds of our imaginations, energy solutions, waste solutions, medical cures, cancer cures, we in exchange learn to embrace their central belief, what they called absolute sustainability, non-matter consumption. You see, after a few more weeks of meeting with our brightest minds, our world religious leaders, the Gradians explained that they used to be a species much like us. They were hungry, not just for conquest and war and the things that make it seems any sapient being tick, but also hungry in the little sense. They would hunt flora and fauna and consume the same as we do, as any life form in the universe does, or so we thought. In return, their world would punish them, causing ecological issues. Droughts, storms, hurricanes, gases leaking into the atmosphere and forever changing the scape of their planet. The very nature of consumption itself was a sin, a poison they could not escape by their own flesh, and they were about to meet their end because of it. But then, 10,000 years ago, a prophet arrived, and he brought them the message of non-consumption, of absolute sustainability. In their words, a holy light shined then from his body and changed them forever. Quickly their genetics changed, their bodies shifted, and the beings, these squid-like beings that stood before us, could no longer consume, and they welcomed it. Now they arrived on Earth to spread this message in tow of absolute sustainability, and believe it or not, many accepted it.
Changing of your genetics like we did ours will not be necessary, we assure you.
One told the President of the United States and several other world leaders to their faces at one UN conference. They quickly explained that what they intend to do is a multi-stage program, one that is fully consensual to the beings of the planet they go to. So you're saying you want us to give up meat? Well, good luck with that, a rather portly anchor says to the being on a Fox News broadcast a few months afterwards. His other co-hosts, a bit more uneasy and a bit less courageous than him, sit a few feet's distance away from the creature. The Gradian, though, raises its hands in assurance.
We assure you this is trial and trial only. If humanity is not receptive to our program, then we will leave, as we have done with numerous civilizations in the past, and will provide ample evidence for doing so.
Ah, horse pucky, the man says, biting into a barbecue sauce-covered slab of ribeye. But you're saying I have to give up my dusk sunset? But this is my shade. This is my shade, right, Ashley? a CNN host of a morning program says and looks at her partner, then back at the Gradian, who manages a human-like chuckle. He points at her lips.
I assure you that your human cosmetics made from animal fats and oils will not be addressed for quite a large sum of years. That would be far too much of a cultural shift, and one we do not wish to impose our values on.
There's a silence in the studio.
Our goals for your species at the moment involve purely dietary changes. Stage 1 involves shifting over from a carnivorous to mainly plant diet. In a few more hundred years...
I'm telling you right now, Mr. Alien, makeup's gonna be a hard bargain to wage with any lady. Any Earth one, at least. Am I right, Ashley? Let's head to commercial break. When we come back...
And then eventually, we will introduce your later generations to the holy light, and will move beyond the need for consumption itself through genetic change and adaptation.
Though many would push back, in the next year, many more farmers that were allowed to meet the Gradians would embrace their new and improved agricultural techniques, shunning away cows, pigs, and poultry. For the Gradians' wonder machines given to them that could produce stalks of corn and grain from their own soil and food scraps, grown in just a week's time. Our largest fossil fuel companies, lobbyists, even royal families attempted to sue the Gradians, citing that their artificial petroleum packets, given out to the masses and when mixed with water, could run just as well as any pump-bought gasoline in our cars, any vehicle, were impeding upon their businesses. These claims would be quickly thrown out in court as, in the eyes of almost any federal judge, the Gradians had no legal existence. Atmospheric CO2 emissions would diminish by up to 30% in the next year. At the same time, the average family would thank the Gradians for their freed-up income from lack of gasoline expenses. Religious leaders would meet with the Gradians, first the Pope, then other leaders from the Far East. Though most were reasonably initially trepidatious, the body of them would agree that the Gradians' existence didn't conflict with their existing religious beliefs, and accepted the aliens' help to humanity with open arms. A famine in a small town in West Africa would be averted with the help of a Gradian wonder machine, in exchange that the populace switched to a vegetarian diet. Even pollution and mercury levels in London's famous River Thames were absolved in the hopes that the population moved away from their mainly fish-based diet. This was met with mixed results. Forests would flourish, ecosystems around the world would come back to life. Portions of the ocean where climate change had taken its worst toll would spring back with the help of gradient technology. A 7.0 earthquake on the LA San Andreas Fault would even be averted, creating a few cults worshipping the aliens in its aftermath. Apparently they wanted to board the Gradian mothership and live within the skyscraper units, being constantly bathed in the Gradians' transforming holy light. When questioned, several of the Gradians humored but dismissed the idea, citing that they had no desire for human indentured servitude aboard their vessel. The Gradians' help towards humanity seemed to be a universal boon, ecologically, economically, and humanitarianly. Still, world governments had their doubts and concerns. The GCC, the Gradient Communication Council, would be established, led by the U.S. military and a mediating group of UN regulators. They would be the single individual conduit to which the Gradians would be permitted to contact humanity through and assist them. The civilian relations component of the GCC would be spearheaded by U.S. Major Alan Montgomery, alongside none other than A. Connor James Jackson of cancer research notoriety, picked for the project primarily because of his unblemished reputation. This leads us back to our old friend Hal, still sitting on his couch in days-old clothes, watching the world's events transpire from his old, faded TV screen. In the years since the Gradians arrived, their help has not helped him too much. He's still balding, he's still divorced, he's still out of work, and more than anything, he's still a liar in the eyes of the public and the scientific community. He raises another beer to his lips when he hears a knock at his front door. The small man opens it, and before him is a man in military fatigues. Hello, I'm Alan Montgomery, U.S. Military GCC. Are you Hal Johnson? Yes, Hal says. Do you know Connor James Jackson? Yes, Hal says. Yeah, well, he's dead now. We need you. It was a freak accident. What should have been a tragedy of everyday life now blown up to the world scale because of circumstance. It was the talk of every major news network in America, and probably everyone outside of it too, for what seemed like forever. Some say it was a traffic accident. Some say the thing's head fins blocked a rearview mirror. Some say the truck wasn't using its turn signals or just plain wasn't paying attention. Driving around with a Gradian stuffed into the passenger seat of a small sedan was unheard of, if not illegal in some eyes. Whatever the case was, when first responders pried open the doors with the jaws of life and red and green blood spilt out the side, we knew this wasn't going to be simple anymore. This could be war. This could be anything. The death of Dr. Connor Jackson and his Gradian friend led to a 2-week period of silence from the Gradian mothership and constant panic from world governments. These were the beings that cured death, after all, if they even had lifespans. Were they immortal? Had any of their population, a single one, even died since 10,000 years ago with their great prophet and their holy light? Could they even die? One just did in that little Earth car going 75 down Interstate 5. Would this mean war? Why wouldn't it? We killed one of them. We killed one of their children. So we've got to protect ourselves. We've got to do everything we can to protect every major population center on Earth from how they'll retaliate. Thought every single world leader on Earth, until the aliens at last emerged from their ship with a proposition.
Death is not common for us. It is unknown to our people. We all mourn the one we lost, the same as I'm sure you all mourn the death of your Dr. Connor Jackson, if I'm correct, Major, and, Dr. Hal Johnson.
Correct. The Major nods and looks over to Hal, still nervously fiddling with his new GCC name tag, in awe at the creature before him, before getting his composure back together. He nods as well. The Gradian continues.
Well, despite our grief, we are a curious bunch, and our teachings say to always find a light in the darkness.
The Major and Hal both look at each other, confused for a moment.
I recognize your concern, so I'll put it blankly. We would like to conduct an autopsy on the body of Dr. Connor Jackson. It is against our teachings, as you know, to desecrate a body even for scientific research. Killing for food, killing for scientific benefit, it is all the same to us. Even the smallest life matters, and ripping open even a perished body is a slippery slope, as you say, that leads to death, that leads to war, that leads to ecological destruction, and ultimately our greatest enemy, consumption. But our leaders do see scientific merit in observing a human body to learn more about ourselves and learn more about you, our dear friends, the humans. So we will bend on this one rule, just this once.
I think I'm following, says the Major.
This is not a one-sided deal. In exchange for allowing us to do this, we will allow you to do the same on our own that perished. That, as we see it, is only fair.
In the ensuing weeks, a top-of-the-line laboratory was requisitioned and prepared. Dr. Connor Jackson's body was put on ice and preserved for the Gradians, and the final preparations for the once-in-a-lifetime exchange of bodies between species were made by the GCC. Overseeing the genetics and biochemistry end of the project, of course, Dr. Hal Johnson, leading a team of over 100 individual researchers, dozens more than he could have ever dreamed in his prior practice. As Hal watches his team prepare on the eve of the big day behind the glass of the lab overseer booth, he feels a tap on his shoulder. It's the Major. First of all, you're lucky, hell, we all are, that man already donated his body to science. Secondly, and this is word from the top, I didn't tell you this, but we cannot mess this up, Hal. Part of the agreement is they're gonna want their body back, same as we're getting ours back from them, so you can't chop it up too bad, and... The Major freezes, then wipes his forehead, taking off his hat to reveal an old, grayed-over scar. He looks Hal dead in the eyes. In case anything goes wrong, in case they ever turn on us, in case they ever attack us. This is our one shot to figure out what makes these things tick. You got that? We can't miss anything, okay? Got it, Hal says before turning back to his team. Smiling, almost lost in his element. The day arrives, and the human party arrives at the agreed-upon location in the American southwestern desert. Almost on cue, one of the Gradian skyscrapers disconnects from the mothership. It crosses the American continent almost at the speed of light before parting the clouds and descending down onto the soft desert sand. Greeting them there is the GCC, several assistants, the Major, Dr. Hal Johnson, and next to him, a small metallic man-sized tube, a temporary casket for Dr. Jackson's remains. The Gradians emerge from their portside door in an unknown formation, 5, 6, maybe 8 of them, walking somberly with their heads lowered. In the grasp of the one front and center, a small palm-sized tube, maybe 6 inches long. He lowers it and presents it to Hal and the Major. "What the hell's this?" he asks the Gradian.
It is the remains of our fallen.
"Ain't there, more?" The Gradians look at each other. They pause, then come to an agreed consensus.
We think this should suffice.
The Major bursts through the door of the main GCC laboratory entrance, a phone cupped to his ear. "Now, Mr. President, I understand it wasn't what we agreed upon. They said they'd give us a whole damn body to do an autopsy on, not a damn popsicle stick." He ducks into a small, secluded meeting room. From the same door, several security agents, then Hal and his research team enter. They open the case and re-examine the alien tube, eyes wide, curious. The vial itself is nothing special, just some translucent blue blood and a little piece of gray flesh floating between its tides. Not the full alien cadaver they were promised. Hal, however, smiles. "No, this is more than enough," he says. Another few weeks pass before the humans and Gradians meet again to re-exchange bodies and share discoveries. Hal hands the vial he was given to work with back to the lead Gradian he met before, the Major standing behind him, still visibly upset at getting the short end of the stick.
You know, your biology is possibly the most fascinating thing I've ever seen.
"You don't say," says the Major.
No lies are being told. Specific glands for releasing chemicals during stress and emergency situations. Dedicated portions of the brain for speech, for learning, for skill adaptation. You're all walking wonders, each and every one of you.
Another Gradian pats him on the shoulder and smiles, almost to say, "You're getting ahead of yourself."
Sorry, we don't get the opportunity to do anything more than flesh-deep scans of beings we meet.
Hal smiles as he accepts back the coffin with Connor Jackson's body. He takes a peek inside and notices it's been barely touched besides a large, singular gash down its abdomen. His rival, now memento mori. The Gradians head back to their ship and almost enter before Hal says to them, "Hey, you guys are walking marvels too. I've never seen living farms before." The Gradians freeze up, for a moment longer than they should, backs turned. Finally, one turns back to Hal almost reluctantly.
What do you mean?
The Major looks puzzled. He turns to Hal almost to stop him, but the man continues. Oh, I just mean your bodies are walking ecosystems. I don't know what your prophet or his holy light did to you, but your genetics, each and every one of you, is a perfect system of, well, self-sustainability. The other Gradients turn towards Hal, eyes full of terror. Each and every single one of these bacteria does something different. Some of them create sugars, some of them create proteins, some of them create fats. But what's more interesting is your immune system, or whatever it would be for us, your T cells, your neutrophils, your macrophages, their equivalents in our bodies are smart. They can raise these bacteria and have them produce more or less of whatever you need. It seems to be on a metabolic cycle. Anyways, you're essentially farming these bacteria and their byproducts for energy. You don't need food because your entire body system is a self-contained farm. You don't need to kill or hunt or eat anything as a people because you do it all the time, just internally, and you don't have to think about it. You're like plants with photosynthesis, just better. Isn't that magical? The aliens all freeze. Did you guys not know this? The Major steps towards Hal. I mean, with another body, maybe a little bit more time. I mean, no disrespect. Who knows what else I could discover? It seems your metabolic system can produce more or less of a protein if you get an injury, or maybe sometimes. The Major pats him on the shoulder. Settle down there, Hal. Let's not scare the ETs. He grabs Hal by his collar and starts to drag him off towards their transport jeep, almost as if to reprimand him when they hear something that they've never heard before. Patter, 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 patter. The sound of the Gradient's little quadrupedal feet running. They storm into their ship, almost pushing each other inside before the skyscraper ship takes off and disappears into the clouds from whence it came. Just as silent and swift as always, but different. Leaving Hal, the Major, and the research team behind, gobstopped and generally perplexed at what just happened. And that would be the last we or anyone ever heard from the Gradients. The mothership over the Atlantic, once benevolently doling out gifts from everywhere from Vancouver to Taipei, stood still for 1 month, then 2 months, then 3, 4, 5, a year, then 2 years straight. Complete radio silence. The Major, of course, had a lot to answer for. World leaders were puzzled, and everyone stood on edge of what exactly it could mean. Until one day, without warning, the entire Metroplex-sized vessel crashed into the waves of the Pacific Ocean on a May 11th morning, Mother's Day. The seismic readings were off the charts, sending waves as far as Tokyo and LA. The official rating was kept top secret, but we all assumed it was big. We'd learn later that every single major world military was on edge for weeks afterwards, thinking a full invasion was about to take place, but nothing ever happened. A few days later, every single skyscraper jutting out of its back vanished, disappearing into the heavens almost as fast as they came. Then, nothing again. The cult members weren't too happy about that. It wasn't until a month later, when a joint Coast Guard Marine mission ventured to the ship, that we'd finally get some closure. We all watched on television as the hundreds of them ventured onto its floating surface, looking for an entrance. We watched for hours as they all scoured the hull, eventually finding one and cracking it open, before 2 Marines dropped dead and the others quickly evacuated. Pouring out of the ship was apparently hydrogen sulfide, poison gas. We never thought about it, but those 2 Marines were technically the first and only people the Gradients ever killed. No more news crews after that. It took almost another 5 months later that we got what we could accept as an official thorough report, and the world was shocked. Within the ship, lined wall to wall, were thousands of dead alien bodies. After the ship was aired out, we learned their cause of death was almost universally asphyxiation. We had more than enough bodies to do an autopsy on at that point. After that, the question on everyone's mind for years and years on end was what exactly happened. The official government answer was they just died. Some didn't believe the government. Some believed them a little too much. Some just wanted their free gasoline again. Studies were conducted, specialists were consulted, and a more satisfying theory came to light once Dr. Hal Johnson's research was declassified and made public finally. Simply put, it seemed the aliens committed mass suicide out of denial. It seemed the truth of this one element of consumption, even so minor, even on the cellular level, was sacrilege to the virtuous species. A heresy in their own blood. The Gradian culture, their beliefs, their faith, their raison d'etre was ironically rooted in the single belief that contradicted what they were, and for some of them the pain was too much. Some seemed to flee to the stars in frustration, never to come back again. Some chose to stay on Earth, but take their own lives in a Jonestown Kool-Aid style event, committing themselves to their floating tomb for eternity. Either way, they were out of our world now. As one stand-up comedian would put it during a televised in memoriam charity event for the aliens later, the consumption consumed them. How ironic. Over time, life returned back to normal, as things always seem to do. Most people went back to eating meat, if any of them ever stopped. The big three industries, beef, pork, poultry, all bounced back in due time. Apparently lamb saw no change whatsoever in sales the entire period the Gradians were here. The medical industry advanced significantly, if not got a bit more pricey with their new fancy alien tech. It's all classified, but we can only assume world governments already gutted the ship for whatever remaining alien tech they could find, though rumor has it they never found a single weapon aboard it. 3 years later, Dr. Hal Johnson is sitting, smiling on a park bench, watching the sun kiss the surface of a shimmering lake. He takes a bite out of a sandwich with him, a nice turkey club on rye, and rubs his hand through his hair. Copper brown, thick locks, seemingly new implants. He looks down and notices a grease stain on his jacket and goes to wipe it when he feels a pat on his shoulder. He turns around, and it's the Major, dressed in flannel and khakis with a nice belly on him, fitting for a man of older age. "Well, howdy, friend. Long time no see." Hal stands up. "Oh, shoot." He finishes gulping down his sandwich. Should I salute?" The Major waves him off. Nah, looks like we're both civvies now," before taking a seat next to him on the other side of the bench. "You got a second?" Hal nods. "Of course, I just gotta pick up the kids at 2. It's my weekend." The Major nods, but sits in silence, just taking in the beauty of the moment, the prosperity alongside Hal. Finally, he's able to manage just a few words that were on the tip of his tongue. I've just got one question for you, Hal, if you can answer that for me." Hal turns to him. Were you really able to deduce all that just from a few drops of blood?" Hal freezes for a moment, then chuckles. He turns to the lake and smiles. "Major, we got an alien invasion off our backs. Don't sweat the small stuff.